Welcome, trying to be positive podcasters. Well, I guess I'm the podcaster. Podcast listeners, podcastees, podcastize, potties,
Listeners.
Welcome. I was thrilled to hear from one of our listeners that she went on a family vacation in a shared RV, and every single time that they would turn on said RV, her family, I should mention, did not know that she was trying or that she is trying at the time. And every time they would turn on the RV, my voice, here we are, back again, would pop up, filling the RV with a lunatic ensemble that is trying to be positive. So thank you for taking me with you on all of your summer adventures, be that British Columbia, or in this case, I think it was New Brunswick. I've always wanted to go to the East Coast, so I was thrilled to have been there. If not in reality, in spirit, and in your RV.
Well, if you're not careful, you're going to have to start calling them your community soon.
My community.
Yeah. You have a community.
Like a real influencer.
Yeah. You have a community.
Ryan, nothing thrills me more.
And speaking of the community, they sent you questions, and we are back with another Ask Me Anything. So let's start with question number 1. And I haven't heard about this yet, so I'm interested to hear your response. Are you excited about the new funding for fertility?
Not only am I so glad that someone asked this, but I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to create a prepared answer for this so that it is both succinct, non-psychotic, because I would be, I think if surprised with this question, have a tendency to yell, which wouldn't be appropriate for your sound levels or my community, if you will. But I think if people actually start thinking through funding in a new way, they'll realize that we're being fooled. We're being appeased by something that isn't very good when we had something that was pretty great. So the new Ontario government is investing $150 million over 2 years to expand the Ontario Fertility Program. This funding aims to reduce wait lists and increase the number of family access to publicly funded fertility services in hospitals and community clinics. Additionally, a new tax credit effective January 2025 will help offset the costs of fertility treatments for eligible individuals. Now, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But what if I told you that from 1985 until 1994, IVF was covered as part of OHIP? So your friends who were created via IVF, I have a few, from 1985 until 1994, their parents didn't have to pay for their creation. It was almost as if fertility and infertility was a valuable part of healthcare, as opposed to a way to make money as part of venture capital. So I'm going to do a little comparison of IVF funding in Ontario circa 2025 compared to the earlier OHIP covered period from 1985 to 1994. So from 1995 until 1994, IVF was generally covered by OHIP for clinically eligible patients throughout Ontario in this period. This coverage included most fertility treatments, including IVF routinely right up until 1994. In 1994, most IVF services were delisted from OHIP, which means that individuals had to pay out of pocket. The only exception remained for those with bilateral fallopian tube obstruction. So essentially, if your tubes were blocked, those individuals were still covered until 2015. There was no public funding limits by age or cycle counts. Coverage was more universal, but cost barriers reemerged after delisting for most people in the 1990s, so around 1995. Public funding under the Ontario Fertility Program. So, since December 2015, The Ontario Fertility Program, the OFP, offers a one lifetime funded IVF cycle per eligible patient, which includes women who are under the age of 43 with OHIP, plus an additional cycle if carried as a surrogate. IUI cycles are unlimited and covered. This is all part of 2015 Ontario Fertility Program. Okay. Approximately 50 clinics currently participate, with each clinic allowed to a limited number of funded cycles per year, which is about 5,000 cycles province-wide. Wait lists are the norm and often long. Many clinics report a 12 to 24-month wait before a funded cycle becomes available. OHIP covers the IVF procedure itself, which is the retrieval, the embryology, one at a time transfer of all embryos, as opposed to, for example, from 1985 to 1994, you could transfer 2 embryos. But now, if you're getting a publicly funded cycle, you absolutely cannot. It doesn't pay for medications. It doesn't pay for embryo storage, shipping, genetic testing, or travel. And these costs are privately then put upon the patient. This is especially interesting. And I was talking to one of my patients who ended up doing IVF for reasons of having genetic issue. And so she has not only had to cover her IVF, medication, et cetera, and so forth. They covered as part of the publicly funded IVF cycle, they covered her funded cycle, but they didn't cover her medications. And the reason that she was doing this was so that she could do the PGT testing to identify whether or not any of the embryos had her particular genetic condition that she was trying to ensure was not carried forward. If she just opted to try at home spontaneously and then had a child with this genetic condition, that child would be not only take away the whole, humanity of that. That child would then have that condition, which then would cost taxpayers OHIP money to care for. So my patient is not only sparing us, the taxpayers, having to pay for this particular genetic condition, but she is now having to fund this herself. Does that make any sense? Absolutely not. Anyway, on average, out-of-pocket expenses for an Ontario Fertility Program patient can run between $5,000 and $15,000 per funded cycle. That's right. So for your funded cycle, you are still expected to pay $5,000 to $15,000 with regards to all of those additional extras. So really highlighting, no, I'm not excited about this funding that we're getting. The new tax support in 2025, effective January 1st, 2025, this new fertility treatment tax credit refunds 25% of eligible fertility-related expenses. So IVF cycles, medications, diagnostics, travel, up to $5,000 a year. So what happens if you're one of those $15,000 patients? Well, it looks like you're going to be $10,000 out of pocket. So also part of this 2024-2025 expansion is $150 million investment over 2 years to triple publicly funded IVF access, expand clinic participation, and reduce wait times. So let's look at this as just a side by side. Okay. So from 1985 to 94, IVF is generally covered for all eligible patients. 2025, including our new amazing public funding. So one covered cycle if you're under 43. Eligibility restrictions. So you have wide access until 1994, whereas now you have to be under 43 and you only have one lifetime IVF cycle. Access constraints. So there are a few limits until it was delisted until 94, whereas now there's limited clinics and a waiting list of about 12 to 24 months when you get on said list for this funded cycle. Out-of-pocket costs. So under OHIP, there is very minimal cost, whereas now you have to pay for medications, storage, travel, genetic tests. Additional support mechanisms. There weren't any because you didn't need them, whereas now the tax credit that refunds you up to 25% Personally, I don't love having to go through, all of the various credits that I can apply towards things that I can get money back for. It's confusing, and my accountant hates it, and I hate it when she's mad at me. So that in itself, adding additional layers of confusion doesn't help anyone. So looking at this, bottom line, between 1985 and 94, IVF was broadly covered by OHIP, widely accessible without any major costs for eligible residents. Also, because it was covered in hospital, you didn't have to worry about travel to particular clinics. You had to worry about traveling to a hospital. But hospitals, if they were to bring it back, which is what I'm hoping, if I were to have a lifetime goal, aside from acupuncture, it would be to advocate that IVF and fertility treatments were accessible in all hospitals as part of, public funded healthcare in Canada. So, what I mean by that is no matter where you live in Canada, there is a hospital that is relatively close to you. Whereas if you live somewhere up north, the likelihood of you being able to get to a fertility clinic for monthly or morning monitoring is pretty unlikely. So by creating it as a health care concern and treating it as such, it removes a lot of the barriers to entry, including travel, cost, and who can have a child versus who cannot. Because that's what it is right now. If you can afford it, you can have a child. And if you can't, you're out of luck. It's treated the same way almost as plastic surgery. Except having a child shouldn't be something that's nice to have. Having a child should be treated the same way as, in my opinion, having the ability to breathe, having the ability to have a heart that works, having ovaries that don't have giant tumors on them. I'm using that example only because when I was 18, I had a mass on one of my ovaries that was crushing all of my organs. And it was nice to know that I could go to a hospital and have that removed as opposed to jumping through hoops as something would be nice to have. It'd be nice to have a functioning organ system, Anyway, I hope that answers your question. No, I am not excited about the new public funding. I'm not excited about the Ontario fertility program. I think it is pure nonsense. And if they think that $150 million is going to be even a drop in the bucket towards creating more fertility clinics, they need to look at and speak to potentially some venture capitalists about how expensive it is to open and run a fertility clinic. 150 is not going to get you anywhere.
Okay, next question. My REI says DNA fragmentation does not matter. I'm sure I know what the answer to this is.
I also have been dealing with REIs who are saying that DNA fragmentation does not matter, which is so strange because these are the same REIs who will, at the drop of a pin, say, the literature says, or evidence says, or I'm an evidence-based practitioner. Same, bro. Same. Hence why I'm actually using the literature. Let's pull it up, shall we? DNA fragmentation predicts embryo quality better than a standard semen analysis. So your fellow can have a normal count, they can have normal motility, they can have normal morphology, but they can still have high DNA frag. The number of times I have had a patient who has come in and said to me, the sperm looks good. And then I say, well, could we please still just humor me and order a DNA frag? And then they go ahead and they do that. And it comes back that the DNA frag is well over 40%. And this poor person that is currently in my mind had been doing timed intercourse. Then she did timed intercourse with letrozole. Then she did timed intercourse with a stim, which involved having to go to the clinic to be monitored every single day until she ovulated. And then she was doing IUIs with stims. So we are now at almost 9 months of her trying with medication, with the time commitment of going in the morning for monitoring, only to find out that her partner's sperm had a 40% DNA frag, which essentially guaranteed that she was not going to be successful. Now, if we had started at the very beginning when we were doing a workup with fragmentation in said workup, this could have been avoided because we would have found out that in this particular case, her partner had not only a varicocele, but elevated cholesterol, both of which can then impact fragmentation. And if you don't know the problem, then you can't solve it. So had she not had this test run, she potentially could have done an IVF cycle, no DNA frag run. They would have ended up with a significant number if they made 5-day blasts, a significant number of aneuploid or abnormal embryos, and they would have blamed her egg quality. When at the end of the day, it was sperm frag. And the problem here is that it paints actually the chap, her husband, as the person who doesn't care, when he very much cares, and he would have done everything that he could have to have improved the situation had he been made aware of it in the first place. So, the damage in terms of the sperm, when the sperm has the fragmented DNA, it requires more mitochondrial energy from the egg to fix the sperm. That mitochondrial energy then is wasted on repairing damage instead of creating an embryo that is going to continue to evolve, multiply, and grow, which is problematic. It's also linked to early miscarriage and, in the case of doing an IVF cycle with highly fragmented sperm, a higher chance of aneuploid embryos and potential implantation failure because the embryo, again, didn't have the mitochondrial energy to continue with its implantation journey, if you will.
Okay, all that being said, the next question is, what can I do to improve frag?
So there's a number of things that you can do to improve fragmentation. You can reduce oxidative stress. So sperm that sits too long in the testicles is exposed to more reactive oxygen species, which then damages the DNA. So when you release it into whatever receptacle of your choice, be that a sock, your hand, a drain, I don't know, but get rid of the old stuff. When you release it, you then have fresher sperm, which has had a lower exposure to said oxidative damage. So I do find it really interesting because when they're doing semen analysis, they recommend that you abstain between 2 and 5 days before you go in for the test. And that's for the whole semen analysis, including the DNA fragmentation. But I think that's an odd choice because for the most part, when couples are trying to conceive, they aren't waiting, 2 to 5 days before they're trying to conceive. They're typically trying every other day or every day in a given window. And so you're given a picture of sperm that isn't actually the same picture in the reality of an everyday pattern when you're trying to conceive. So by frequently releasing and then doing a semen analysis, and by frequently releasing, I mean sort of like on an everyday schedule for about a 2 to 7 day window. If you're doing that and then you go and have that sperm tested, that's more likely to be the same picture for your sperm than, an abstinence schedule, which I understand is the recommendation when they're trying to do an IUI, because then you actually need a certain amount of volume. But when you're either doing an analysis or you're doing an IVF cycle where you need a very limited number of sperm, it doesn't make a ton of sense that you're having that abstinence period in the first place when you know for a fact that abstinence creates a higher fragmentation. So, all is to say, clean your pipes, do so before your fertile window, and do so in a way where no one's going to slip. You like that, Ryan?
Yeah.
It's slippery.
Yeah. That's
It's gross.
yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah, I don't really feel like discussing the details of that right now.
Well, fair enough. Well, but I mean, the clearing out of said damaged sperm, it's a conversation I feel we should be having more regularly. Perhaps you don't want to have that conversation with me, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll have that conversation, but I don't really want to get into the
slippery?
to the finer details of
slip and slides.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So anyway, yes, you can frequently release to improve your DNA fragmentation. You can take supplements to improve that same oxidative stress. It is reduced when you take antioxidants. A favorite being CoQ10, but vitamin E is very important. L-carnitine is very important. Zinc is very important. Folate is very important. These are the main sperm superheroes, if you will. It's also very important to check cholesterol. Ryan, you wanted to talk about cholesterol?
Yeah, there's another question. My husband has high cholesterol and high frag. Doesn't matter.
Yes, it is connected. Elevated cholesterol, particularly LDL or your bad cholesterol, contributes to that same menace, oxidative stress. So, oxidative stress is the major cause for sperm DNA frag. It also is responsible for reduced motility and abnormal morphology. A 2018 review in Frontiers in Physiology noted that elevated cholesterol is associated with impaired sperm function due to lipid peroxidation of the sperm membrane, which is very important. Cholesterol is also a huge hormone disruptor. It's a precursor for steroid hormones, including testosterone. But too much cholesterol then disrupts the balance of hormone production, potentially impairing testicular function and sperm production, which then is problematic for obvious reasons. It also impairs sperm membrane integrity, which means that your sperm membrane is very rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids and is very much then vulnerable to damage from an altered lipid profile or like an altered fat profile. The high cholesterol changes the fluidity and composition of the sperm membrane, which then affects its ability to fertilize the egg. Also, not to mention that high cholesterol is often part of a bigger picture, which is metabolic dysfunction, which is associated with increased scrotal temperature, inflammation, insulin resistance, and most importantly, poor sperm parameters.
So no high cholesterol.
No.
Okay. Well, better go get that checked.
Or more importantly, what can you do about it?
Live a better life.
Yes. Well, I mean, you lower your LDL and raise your HDL. How do you do that, Ryan?
How do you do that?
High fiber.
Mm.
Fiber is your friend.
Yeah, we were talking about fiber earlier, and you were saying that you think you're getting fiber, but you're really not getting fiber.
That's because people will have one salad a day and they think that they're getting the recommended amount of fiber in their diet, and they're not. Women need to be getting over 30 to 35 grams of fiber a day, and men should be getting upwards of 35 to 40 grams of fiber a day.
Well, we need to make sure that people know what to do to hit those marks.
There's actually, and we are not sponsored in any way, shape, or form. We are willing to change that.
Yeah, we will take it.
But there is this amazing bread called the Grain Escape. I am obsessed with it. It is a low FODMAP paleo bread that is incredibly high in fiber. And it's incredibly high in fiber in the best way, because so many fiber powders that I've taken in the past, even fruits and vegetables, aggravate my GI, in that I know that it's helpful because it's getting rid of all of my bad cholesterol, but at the same time, it's also causing me to be bloated and miserable. So, although I may live a long life, I will have to do so as a balloon. And I don't want to do that. Just floating away, excusing myself in weird spots so that I don't embarrass myself or my family due to my obsession with fiber. You can also improve your cholesterol with regular exercise. Nobody wants to hear that because nobody wants to exercise. Everybody just wants to take pills these days. But believe it or not, unfortunately, I'm going to continue to bang that drum. Boom! Get going with your exercise. If you are concerned about your sperm, don't make that an endurance exercise. Make that hitting the weights. You can do upper and lower supersets to get your heart rate up without causing an elevated scrotal temperature. Very important. what I'm doing right now with my laptop. Bad for your scrotum. Wait, I don't have one.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Timing and TTC and supplements everyone should take. So I'm guessing they mean what supplements you should be taking for those scenarios.
I'm not going to get into the breakdown of supplements only because I feel as though that I actually have a huge issue with social media for that, in that this mass prescription of everybody should be on these fertility supplements. There are building blocks that you can start with, and I'll delve into that. But for your specific issue, just like not everyone's going to benefit from IVF, not everybody's going to benefit from, a mass prescription of any type of supplement.
Right.
Because, for example, let's say you misinterpreted having an immune dysfunction and you thought to yourself, I'm going to start taking something to help my immune system because I read, on this Instagram page, or I heard on this TikTok episode, or that someone said that if I improve my immune system, that could be my issue when it comes to fertility. Let's say you actually did have an immune system concern. It was dysregulated, but it was dysregulated in a way where it was hyperactive. If you were to go to purchase just like a natural, supplement to improve your immune system, anything that says immune regulation, for the most part, when you go and you buy it either off of, Amazon or Fullscript or Whole Foods, it's going to increase the number of immune cells that you have. It's going to increase the amount of natural killer cells that you have. So echinacea, for example, is something that will increase your immune system. Same with elderberry. So if someone who had an overactive immune system like myself took, I can't even take garlic because it increases my immune system's capacity, which then increases its capacity to attack me. But if you have a dysregulated immune system and you have, let's say, elevated NK cells, and then you started taking echinacea every day, that's going to have a negative consequence on your fertility, and which is such a shame because you're going to be taking this thinking you're helping yourself. So supplements that can benefit most people include CoQ10 and fish oil. Even vitamin E is a bit of a spicy choice because if you take vitamin E, it can improve your immune system. And if your immune system is dysfunctional, that can be problematic. Vitamin E can also, it doesn't have as much of an antioxidant, vitamin E doesn't have as much of an anti-inflammatory action as omega-3, and it does thin your blood. So you have to be careful when you are layering CoQ10, omega-3, vitamin E, because they're all thinning your blood, which in some cases might be beneficial, but in some cases might be problematic. So it's very important to come to the understanding that you have to have a workup first. You have to understand what's going on in your body before you start taking anything. So I'm going to conclusively say that something that you could take to benefit your fertility, you want to take folate, methylfolate. Everyone will benefit from that. You want to take CoQ10 to improve the mitochondrial energy of both sperm and egg. And you want to take omega-3s. A safe and standard dose would be about 2,000 milligrams of omega-3 to benefit inflammation, to help with circulation, and to improve FSH. If it's elevated, it can actually reduce inflammation, which then reduces FSH and increases AMH.
What do you need to look for when you're looking for a fish oil? Because there's like you say someone goes on Amazon, there's so many fish oils on there, and sometimes you get caught up in a certain ingredient that somebody is suggesting. So, like, what do you need to look for if you're looking for a fish oil?
So typically when I recommend that patients take fish oil, I recommend that they take a higher EPA to DHA ratio fish oil, because EPA is better for inflammatory conditions and it's better for improving um, the like inflammation status of patients who potentially have lower AMH or higher FSH. Um, I like them to switch, however, to like a 1-to-1 ratio EPA to DHA when they become pregnant, because DHA has a lot of benefit in helping build baby's brain and eyes, amongst other things. But what ingredient are you concerned
Well,
about
no, I
specifically?
like I did this research like I found the same thing that you just explained. I just think I think what people get wrong about supplements is if you go to, I don't know, Walmart, if you look at Amazon, there's different options. There's ones that are $100 and there's ones that are 70 and there's some that are 30.
Right.
So I think people like you said earlier, you said $350 in supplements. People are like, what the hell? But at the same time, if you want to take supplements to make a difference, I do feel like you have to not buy the $30 one and
Yeah.
buy the $70 to $100 one, unfortunately.
There's some really good companies that are pretty transparent. I actually really like Bird Bee because they state where they're sourcing their supplements from. And a lot of the ingredients that they're using, there's self regulation within those companies. So the more professional brands, they have self regulation in that they are actually testing their product. They're conducting studies to determine whether or not said product is actually useful. And for the most part, you're not going to find, old or expired, which is important for fish oil, ingredients in these products, which is really important. You should be able to understand what's in your supplement, but you should also be able to understand where it's been sourced.
Okay, next one. Best option for getting an endo diagnosis.
So, in order to get an endo diagnosis, and it's incredibly important that you do, you need to get a referral to SUGO. If you are in Ontario, you need to get a referral to SUGO, which is the ultrasound clinic at McMaster Hospital. You don't get a referral to McMaster, and you don't get a referral to Leonardi. You get the referral to SUGO. I have so many patients who will come in and tell me that their primary physician has said that you cannot, under any circumstances, see endometriosis on an ultrasound. This is true if your knowledge of endometriosis is either lacking or outdated. What you need to do is understand that the field of endometriosis, thanks actually so much to so many physicians who have actually taken this as, a personal project, but specifically Matthew Leonardi, charging forward with new ways of understanding the disease and the disease progression. So you want to get a referral to SUGO. You'll be put on the wait list, at which point they are moving as fast as they possibly can, but you can get an actual diagnosis. You need a diagnosis. Don't get treated for endometriosis based simply off of the premise that we can assume that you have it or you look like you have it. We should know that you have it. We should know where it is. So that is important. It's also important to recognize that you don't have to have surgery first to get that diagnosis. If you do end up getting surgery and it is found during surgery, then obviously that is a way of being diagnosed. You can also, if you have large endometriomas and they can actually be seen on a standard ultrasound, at that point, typically you're graded as having like stage 4 endometriosis. In that case, it doesn't necessarily mean that your prognosis is better or worse, which is interesting because if you have visible endometriomas and they can be seen and you hear I have stage 4, typically you're pretty frightened because you're like, oh God, stage 4 anything is the worst. But I have a lot of patients where they have endometriomas on their ovaries and they don't have much anywhere else. And a lot of the time, the silent endo or, superficial endo can actually be more problematic from an immune standpoint in that they have elevated cytokines, which is actually impeding implantation and increasing systemic inflammation, which is problematic from both a digestive as well as a mental health standpoint.
Okay, last question. How to remain hopeful when you feel like you're doing everything right, which is obviously a very important question.
Everybody thinks that you should just intrinsically be hopeful, that certain people are more hopeful than others, that if you are more positive, you are also therefore more hopeful. But hope requires work. Anything worthwhile, anything worth having, anything worth being requires work. So if you're finding yourself feeling hopeless, it's important to recognize that. Almost the same way it's important to understand a diagnosis, because that way you can understand the root of the issue. So, understanding, why do I feel so bad? I feel so bad because I'm feeling so without hope. You can then look for what are things that could help me feel more hopeful. Understanding that your cycle, understanding that medication, understanding that certain circumstances are going to weigh more heavily on you is important. For my patients, for example, because I am a creepy practitioner, I know where my patients are roughly in their cycle before I see them. So if I haven't heard from someone and I know that they were in the last week of their 2-week wait, the next time I see them, I'm fully aware that they are either about to get or they have gotten or they're currently have their period. At which point their estrogen is going to be very low, their progesterone is going to be very low, and their mood is going to be very low. That's when I know that I have to be that support for that patient. So if you can write in your own journal, hey, you can go find where you're going to be either getting a positive pregnancy test or where you're going to be starting to understand that you're potentially going to get your period. You can write down in the days leading up to it reasons why you should remain hopeful. Or even just the acknowledgement that I'm going to have a hard time in a few days. Because when someone's taken aback and they don't understand why they feel a certain way, or they don't understand that this is cyclical and that they always feel this way, it feels a lot more intrusive and a lot harder to get through. So, understanding yourself, understanding your cycle, understanding your triggers. I had one patient the other day who told me that she muted all of the Instagram accounts that she found that took some of her joy. And I thought that was a really smart and self-regulatory way of caring for herself and helping keep that hope, that boy alive. Understanding also stories. It's one of the reasons why I created both of your fertility stories Instagram account, but also why I share so many stories on this podcast, because it's easy for me, who sees upwards of 30 to 40 people a day, so upwards of 200 people on average a week, come through these doors. So the ratio of people that are becoming pregnant to those who are not becoming pregnant is significantly in favor of those who are becoming pregnant. So I see the wretched journeys and then the patients becoming pregnant. So in my brain, I'm like, well, why are you feeling hopeless? This is going to end up okay. We just have to keep trucking along, finding out what's wrong and then remedying that situation. But for you, when you're alone in a hole, feeling as though you're the only one going through it, and then not to be disrespectful, but I really find support groups are pretty, I'd say, damaging, honestly. And I know I'm going to get flack for that, but I don't really care. Because the number of patients who have gone on Reddit threads or who have joined support groups or online or in person, only to then hear from within that support group the negative shit and the new worries that are then piled upon them, that's not hopeful. That's not helpful. Instead, focusing on stories of a journey through hell and back, that's the best way to remain hopeful, because then you will learn that anything worthwhile takes time, And in so many scenarios, it was in gathering up the puzzle pieces and in putting them in the right spot, taking time, taking effort, taking energy, only to then get that full completed puzzle. I think so much of the time in society right now, we are given this concept of like, I want it now, I get it now. So our expectations are really thrown. So when I started this in Toronto in 2014, and by this I mean my practice, I had a lot of patients who it took a lot longer than, 3 to 4 months. And they understood that. And so when we were in the like 8, 9 month mark, having done all of our due diligence with checking out whether or not there were any underlying issues, people still had hope. Whereas now, people will come to see me after 2 months of trying and they're classifying themselves as infertile. Having a firm grasp of expectation and reality is incredibly important. Fertility is one of those things that you don't have control over. And if you think that you can get control of your fertility simply by throwing money at it or coming to see me, that's not going to work. You have to take a certain amount of accountability and look at yourself, look at your life, and understand that this is your journey. This is your struggle. And struggle, again, I'm going to get flack for this. Struggle is what builds you as a human being. I've got a tattoo and it says, hardships prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. And I got that after witnessing a few rather horrific scenarios in my own life, including but not limited to my father passing away from leukemia at the age of 49. And that was very hard for me at the age of 20. And I look back at that and it was a scenario that I don't wish to live through again. But it's one where I'm grateful for the lessons that I got from it because it built me into a much stronger human being. And it gave me an appreciation for life that I don't feel I would have had I not gone through it. It's also made me a very patient and very introspective mother. I'm fully aware that I may not be able to see my children grow up. I might not see them graduate. And so I appreciate every single day that I have with them. And I make decisions in my career and in my personal life that prioritizes them. So that perspective I gained through hardship, it's one that I found that a lot of my fertility patients also have taken because they got through so much to have their kids that their appreciation for them is heightened. It's elevated. It's given them more of an appreciation for being a parent and for all of the lessons that got them there. I haven't had a single guest thus far that has said, I went through that fertility journey and it was shit and I'm really upset that it happened. Every single person, even when it took an exceptionally long period of time. I have one woman who's coming in for her final acupuncture appointment, 2025, at the end of this week, tomorrow morning. And she has been with me since 2019. And when I asked her, how do you feel about coming in for your last acu appointment? And she said, you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. This is the most common response. So to know that after 6 years of getting through this, the joy of getting to the baby that she's about to have and the understanding that if she had gone through this in any other way, she wouldn't be having this baby is super special. So just know that even though your journey feels hopeless, it feels dark, look for the positive stories, not the ones where somebody got pregnant after 3 months. Look to the stories and speak to the people who went through hell and high water and came out on the other side.